Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The sound of the truck's engine roared through the empty highway, echoing into the night like a warning. Officer Davis squinted through the darkness, watching the old truck move sluggishly toward him. The headlights flickered, casting an uneven light across the desolate road. The silence of the early hours was shattered by the deep hum of the engine, and Davis felt his gut tighten. Something didn't sit right. He had been patrolling these roads for years. The dead of night always brought out the oddities, the late-night travelers, the truckers who didn't stop at rest areas, the cars that swerved or moved at strange speeds. But this felt different. This truck wasn't just an unusual sight, it felt like an omen. The rusted old vehicle sputtered as it slowly rolled toward him, pulling off to the side of the road. It barely seemed capable of holding itself together. The body was dented and scraped, the tires worn down. But it wasn't the state of the truck that made Davis uneasy. It was the way the man behind the wheel didn't seem to notice him, didn't react at all. He just kept driving, moving toward the shoulder like it was part of some routine. The truck came to a stop, the engine shutting off with a loud cough. The headlights flickered again, and the man behind the wheel didn't move. No hand to open the door. No sign that he even noticed the police car sitting behind him. Davis felt his fingers twitch. The truck's motor had barely sputtered to a stop, and the quiet in the air felt heavier than it should have. The man didn't even turn his head. Not even a glance. Davis reached up and clicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting through the night. He kept his hand on the door handle, eyeing the truck carefully. He knew there was something wrong about this. He wasn't sure what yet, but his instincts were screaming. Something wasn't right. Stepping out of his squad car, Davis clicked his flashlight off. The silence around him felt almost suffocating. The only sound was the slow hum of the truck's engine as if it were waiting, anticipating something. Davis moved cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel, every step making his senses heighten even further. There was an eerie stillness to the night, one that seemed to stretch on forever, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees far in the distance. He approached the truck with purpose. The man inside still hadn't moved. He seemed almost frozen in place, his hands gripping the wheel with a deathly stillness. His clothes were tattered, the kind of clothes that spoke of years of hard work, rough weather, and a life that had been lived too hard. Davis stopped a few feet away from the truck, his gaze falling on the figure inside. The man's face was hidden under a worn-out cap, his eyes covered by the shadow it cast. His breathing was slow, deliberate, as if he was in no hurry, no rush at all. "Evening, sir. License and registration, please," Davis said, his voice calm but firm. He was always polite with people he stopped, no matter how strange the situation. Still, there was something off about this encounter, something that felt forced. The man didn't even glance at him. Davis took a step closer, closer than he would have under normal circumstances, but his gut told him to keep going. When the man didn't respond, Davis repeated his request. This time, his voice was a little firmer. "License and registration." Still nothing. Davis's eyes darted back to the truck, scanning it for any signs of life, any hint of movement. There were none. The engine still hummed with an odd consistency, but nothing else stirred. No dogs, no passengers, nothing in the cab that suggested there was more going on here than what met the eye. Yet everything inside him was telling him there was more. He started to feel that familiar sense of unease crawling up his spine. He reached for his radio, his fingers brushing over the button to call for backup, but before he could speak, the roar of engines cut through the night like a knife. Two black SUVs sped past, tires screeching as they took the sharp turn onto the road behind him. Davis's eyes snapped toward them, narrowing. It was an odd hour for such vehicles to be out here, especially on this dead stretch of road. As the SUVs came closer, he caught the flicker of their headlights and the unmistakable speed of their movement. His heart started to beat faster. One of the SUVs swerved sharply, and the other followed suit. The tires screeched in protest as the vehicle slammed to a halt directly beside his squad car, blocking the road entirely. The dust kicked up by their speed filled the air, and Davis felt a rush of adrenaline hit him. Before he could react, the doors of both SUVs flung open in unison. Several men, dressed in black military gear, spilled out of the vehicles, their movements precise and coordinated. Davis's throat went dry. This wasn't normal. His hand twitched toward his sidearm, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. These weren't typical criminals. He had seen enough to know the difference. These men didn't move like civilians. They moved like soldiers, like they had a mission. They fanned out, surrounding the area with quick, calculated steps. They didn't look at Davis. Their eyes were trained on the truck, on the man still sitting inside, motionless. Davis felt his pulse quicken as he tried to piece together what was happening. What the hell was going on? The leader of the group, a tall man with dark sunglasses, stepped forward, his gaze locked on the truck's driver. He didn't acknowledge Davis, didn't even seem to care that he was there. The military men moved with efficiency. One of them approached the truck, his steps deliberate and calm. As he came close to the window, the old man inside didn't flinch. There was no movement from him. His hands never left the steering wheel. The officer felt a chill sweep over him. He couldn't explain it, but the entire scene felt staged. Like everything was unfolding according to some unseen script. Davis cleared his throat, trying to push past the dread that was creeping in. He had to act. He was a police officer. He couldn't let this slide, not with his instincts screaming at him. "Who are you people?" he called out, his voice steady but with an edge of authority. The tall man in front of the truck finally turned his head toward him. The look in his eyes was cold, empty. Like they had already written him off. It wasn't a look Davis was used to seeing. Usually, people responded to authority. But not these men. Before Davis could ask another question, the man gestured for the officer to stand back, his finger making a subtle motion. It was clear this was not a situation Davis could control. It wasn't his call to make. "Stay back, officer," the man said, his voice flat. "This is above your pay grade." Davis swallowed hard, his hand still resting on his sidearm. The words didn't sit well with him. Something about them was off, like a threat hidden in a polite gesture. The truck's engine sputtered to life once more. It rumbled unevenly, but it came back to life with surprising power. The military men didn't react, but Davis did. His heart pounded faster, and his instincts screamed that this was far from over. The old man in the truck finally looked up, his eyes meeting Davis's with an eerie calmness. For a split second, Davis felt like he was being stared into, like the man saw through him completely. And then the driver did something that would haunt Davis for the rest of his life. He smiled. It was a slow, almost imperceptible curve of his lips, as if he knew something the officer didn't. As if he had been waiting for something, waiting for the exact moment when everything would fall into place. Davis didn't know what was happening, but he felt a strange, unsettling sense of dread building inside him. And then the radio crackled to life. "Move in now." Davis froze. His heart stopped. He didn't have time to react. Before he could even process the words, everything around him shifted. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet, and the air thickened with an intensity he couldn't explain. The military men moved in unison, surrounding the truck with military precision. Davis's hand hovered over his radio as he called for backup, but it was too late. A shadow passed over him, followed by a deafening silence. The world went dark. The world was spinning. Officer Davis felt disoriented as the darkness swallowed him whole. His pulse raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. 1 second, he was standing on the side of the road, trying to make sense of the old truck and the military SUVs that had appeared out of nowhere. The next, everything went pitch black. He couldn't see. He couldn't hear. He couldn't think. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, as if they were made of lead. His mouth was dry, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that was far beyond anything he had ever dealt with before. He tried to remember the events leading up to this moment, but his mind kept slipping. The truck, the military men, the radio, nothing made sense. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Just as he thought he might lose his grip on reality altogether, a bright light pierced the darkness. It was blinding, like 1,000 suns, and for a moment, Davis thought he might be dreaming. But the pain in his head told him otherwise. This was real. And whatever was coming next, he was caught right in the middle of it. He blinked rapidly, his eyes adjusting to the sudden change in brightness. Slowly, his vision cleared. He was no longer on the side of the road. Instead, he found himself in an unfamiliar room. The walls were concrete, cold and unwelcoming. A single fluorescent light buzzed above him, casting a sickly glow across the room. He was sitting in a metal chair, his hands cuffed to the arms. He tried to move, but the restraints held him firmly in place. His heart raced again. Where was he? What had happened to him? And what had happened to the old truck and the military men? The door to the room creaked open, and Davis stiffened. A man walked in, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a cold expression. His black uniform blended into the shadows, but Davis could make out the insignia on his sleeve, a skull with crossed bones beneath it. Davis felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't a normal operation. These people weren't just soldiers. They were something else. The man stopped in front of Davis, looking him up and down with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. He didn't speak at first, just studied Davis for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You're awake," he said, his words clipped and deliberate. "Good. You're going to need your strength." Davis swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "What is this? Where am I? What do you want from me?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a black box with a screen. He turned it on, the screen lighting up in a soft glow. Without a word, he placed the device on the table in front of Davis and pressed a few buttons. The screen flickered to life, and Davis's heart skipped a beat when he saw what was on it. It was a video, a grainy, shaky clip that looked like it had been taken with a cheap camera. At first, the footage was unclear, but then it came into focus. Davis's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the image on the screen. It was the old truck, the one he had pulled over earlier. But this time, it wasn't on the side of the road. It was moving, faster than it should have been. And behind it, there were more black SUVs. More military men. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The truck was carrying something. Something large, wrapped in a heavy tarp. Davis's stomach twisted. The shape beneath the tarp looked unnatural, like it didn't belong in a regular vehicle. He couldn't make out what it was, but something about it made his skin crawl. The footage shifted. The camera moved quickly, showing a series of images in rapid succession. The military men were in full gear, surrounding the truck and its cargo. They moved like clockwork, unloading the tarp with incredible precision. But then, the footage cut out. The screen went black for a moment before it flickered back to life, showing an image of Davis. His own face, as clear as day. He was standing by his squad car, looking at the truck. The footage was from earlier that night, the moment he had pulled the truck over. Davis's heart skipped. How did they have this footage? How were they watching him? The man who had been standing silently in front of him finally spoke again, his voice colder than before. "You're a part of something much bigger than you realize, Officer Davis. That truck, the men you saw, and the cargo, it's all connected. And now, you are too." Davis's head was spinning. He couldn't process everything the man was saying. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." The man sighed, as if Davis were asking the most obvious question in the world. "I'm talking about the operation. You're part of it now. You've been following the wrong people, officer. You've been watching the wrong things." "What do you mean, the wrong people?" Davis asked, his voice rising with frustration. "Who are these people? What is this operation? And why am I here?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but it wasn't one of comfort. It was a smile born of superiority, of someone who knew a terrible truth that the other person couldn't comprehend. "I can't tell you everything, not yet. But I can tell you this, you were never supposed to stop that truck. Not tonight, not ever. You've seen too much. And now, we have to make sure you understand what's at stake." Davis felt a chill run down his spine. What was at stake? What was he involved in now? He had no answers, only questions that seemed to lead deeper into the darkness. The man turned to leave but paused at the door. He glanced back at Davis, his expression unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "But for now, you're a prisoner. Until we decide what to do with you." The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Davis was left alone in the cold, sterile room. His mind raced as he tried to piece together everything that had happened. The truck, the military men, the cargo, the footage, it didn't add up. Nothing made sense. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew. He was in way over his head. For hours, Davis sat there in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He had been in tough situations before, but this felt different. This was bigger than anything he had ever encountered. He didn't know who these men were or what they were after, but they were playing a dangerous game, and he had been dragged into it. Finally, the door opened again. This time, 2 more men entered. They were younger, dressed in the same black military gear, but their expressions were less cold, more eager. They moved quickly, almost like they were running out of time. One of them spoke first, his voice low. "It's time." The other man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, no bigger than a cell phone. He pressed a few buttons, and the restraints on Davis's arms clicked open. The cuffs fell away from his wrists, and he rubbed his sore skin, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. "Get up," the first man ordered. "We're taking you to the boss." Davis hesitated, but there was no choice. These men had the power now. He had no idea where they were taking him, but he wasn't about to find out the hard way. He stood slowly, his legs shaky from sitting in the chair for so long. As he moved toward the door, his mind raced with questions. Who was the boss? What did they want with him? And most importantly, what was really in that truck? There was only one way to find out. The long corridor felt oppressive. The walls, made of cold concrete, seemed to close in around Davis with each step. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. His pulse quickened. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to break free, to run, but he knew he was powerless. These men had him in their grip, and there was nothing he could do. Not yet. The 2 soldiers walked silently beside him, their eyes fixed straight ahead. They didn't speak a word, but their presence was loud enough. Davis tried to steady his breathing, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. He had no idea where they were taking him, but it wasn't good. He could feel it in his gut. After what seemed like an eternity, they came to a steel door at the end of the corridor. One of the men pushed a button on the wall beside it, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Davis was ushered inside. The room was enormous, much larger than anything he had imagined. It was stark and clinical, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. There were no windows, just rows of tables and computers. The walls were lined with shelves stacked high with boxes, most of them labeled in foreign languages. The air was thick with a sterile, metallic scent. At the far end of the room, a man stood. His back was to them, but Davis could see the broad shoulders, the way he carried himself like someone in total control. The man turned slowly, and Davis felt a chill run through him. This was the boss, the one the soldiers had spoken about. The man was older than Davis had expected, maybe in his 50s, but his presence was commanding. His sharp eyes took in Davis immediately, sizing him up like a predator eyeing its prey. He wore a suit that looked out of place in the sterile environment, but there was nothing soft about it. The suit, the glasses, the calm demeanor, it all added to his sense of danger. "Sit down, Officer Davis," the man said, his voice smooth but firm. "We have much to discuss." Davis hesitated, but the soldiers behind him prodded him forward. He found an empty chair in front of the man's desk and sat down, trying to ignore the unease spreading through his chest. The man, who Davis now saw had a name tag that read Jensen, sat down behind the desk. He didn't offer Davis any pleasantries. Instead, he began to speak in a low, controlled tone. "Let's get straight to the point," Jensen said. "You've seen something tonight that you weren't supposed to see. Something far beyond the scope of your understanding." He paused, studying Davis closely. "I'll be blunt with you, officer. You're in way over your head." Davis tried to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. What did he mean? What was going on? Why was he here? He had so many questions, but he didn't dare voice them. There was something about Jensen's presence that made it clear that speaking out of turn would be a mistake. "Do you know what's in that truck?" Jensen asked suddenly, his eyes narrowing. Davis swallowed hard. He had a sickening feeling that he already knew the answer. "I don't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jensen leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "That truck isn't just some ordinary vehicle, officer. It's carrying something that has the potential to change everything. The men you saw with it are part of an organization that operates in the shadows, a group that has been working for years to achieve something. Something we cannot allow to fall into the wrong hands." The weight of Jensen's words hit Davis like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about a simple traffic stop. This was something far more dangerous. Davis wanted to ask more, to push for answers, but the words stuck in his throat. There was something about Jensen's calmness that made it clear this wasn't a conversation for someone like him. "Do you know how much danger you're in, officer?" Jensen asked, his voice soft but sharp. "You've seen the men in black, you've seen the truck, and now you're here, speaking to me. You're a part of this whether you like it or not." Davis's heart pounded in his chest. The realization was settling in, but it was hard to accept. He had always been a lawman, someone who kept the peace. Now, he was a pawn in some dark game that he didn't understand. He had been forced into this position, but what choice did he have now? "What's in the truck?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. Jensen didn't answer immediately. He picked up a folder from his desk and opened it, scanning through the pages inside. Finally, he pushed the folder toward Davis. "I can't show you everything," Jensen said, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone. "But you need to know that the contents of that truck are unlike anything you've ever encountered. They have the power to shape the future. And there are people who will do anything to get their hands on it." Davis glanced down at the folder, his eyes scanning the text. It was all classified, the kind of information that no one outside of certain circles should ever have access to. But there was one thing that stood out to him, a series of numbers. They were written in bold, clear typeface, and something about them made his stomach churn. These numbers, Davis said, his finger pointing to the page. What do they mean? Jensen looked at him, his eyes flicking to the page before returning to Davis's face. Those numbers are the key, he said quietly. They're the coordinates of a location we've been trying to find for years. A place hidden away, far from civilization. But we don't know what's there, exactly. Only that the contents of that truck lead to it. Davis felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The idea of a hidden location, one that people had been searching for years, was enough to make his mind spin. But what was truly in the truck? What was so important that it had caused all of this? I don't understand, Davis said, his voice low. Why me? Why am I here? What do you want from me? Jensen's expression hardened. We want your help, Officer Davis. You've already shown that you're capable. You stopped that truck, even though you didn't know what you were dealing with. Now, we need someone on the inside, someone who can help us find the answers. Davis stared at him, his mind racing. He was caught in something far beyond his control. There was no way out of this. He had no choice but to comply, at least for now. If he could get close enough, maybe he could figure out what was really going on. But even as he thought this, a part of him knew that the deeper he got, the more dangerous it would become. You don't have to say yes right now, Jensen said, breaking his train of thought. But know this, you'll be in this, whether you want to be or not. The stakes are higher than you can imagine. The door behind him opened again, and another soldier entered the room. His expression was tense, his eyes darting between Davis and Jensen. There's a situation, the soldier said urgently. We've got a problem. Jensen didn't flinch. He simply stood, pushing the folder back toward Davis. Stay here. I'll be back, he said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Davis watched as Jensen left the room, his thoughts spinning faster than he could keep up. What was going on? What kind of trouble had they just stepped into? He didn't know, but he was about to find out. Davis sat alone in the sterile, cold room, his thoughts swirling like a whirlwind. The fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, adding to the tense atmosphere. His heart still pounded from the tension of the past few hours. He had been thrust into something far deeper than he could have ever imagined, and now, the walls seemed to be closing in on him. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on to his sanity. But there was one thing he did know, he was no longer just a cop. He was a piece in a game that stretched far beyond his comprehension. The door creaked open, and the soldier from earlier stepped back into the room. His face was grim, and Davis immediately knew something had gone wrong. Sir, we have an issue, the soldier said, his voice tight with urgency. He glanced over his shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. The convoy is on the move. Davis's stomach dropped. The convoy. The one he had seen earlier that night, the one carrying something that was supposed to be so dangerous that even the military had been put on high alert. His mind raced. Where were they going? What did they want from him? I need to know where they're headed, Davis said, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. I need answers. The soldier hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, lowering his voice. The convoy is heading to a location deep in the mountains. We don't know exactly what's there, but Jensen's team believes it's the key to everything. Davis's thoughts raced. The mountains. The location. The numbers from the folder. It all seemed to fit together like a twisted puzzle. But what was the final picture? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something far darker than he had ever anticipated. Suddenly, the door opened again, and Jensen stepped into the room. His calm demeanor hadn't changed, but the tension in his eyes was unmistakable. He didn't waste any time. He moved to the desk, picked up a tablet, and handed it to Davis. This is the mission, Jensen said, his voice clipped. You're going with them. It's time to see it through. Davis took the tablet, his hands slightly shaking. On the screen, a map was displayed, detailing a series of winding roads through the mountain range. A red dot marked a specific location. The coordinates matched the numbers from the folder. "This is where we think it's hidden," Jensen continued, pointing to the map. "We don't know exactly what we'll find, but we have to get there first. No one can reach this location before us." Davis stared at the map, his mind racing. Everything was connected now. The truck, the convoy, the numbers, the mountains, each piece of the puzzle was falling into place. But the more he understood, the more it seemed like the truth was slipping further away. "I'm going with them?" Davis asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What if it's a trap? What if they know we're coming?" Jensen's eyes narrowed. "They're always watching, officer. Always. But we don't have a choice. We move out now, or we lose everything." Davis's mind spun. He was being thrown into a situation where he had no control. He had no idea who these people really were, or what they were truly after. All he knew was that he had a choice to make. He could stay here, a prisoner to whatever this mission had become, or he could follow the convoy into the unknown and pray he didn't regret it. Before he could say anything else, Jensen turned and motioned for him to follow. The soldier who had been standing guard stepped aside, allowing Davis to exit the room. As they walked down the hallway, Davis's stomach twisted with nerves. What was out there? What was waiting for him in those mountains? They reached the hangar, where a military transport vehicle was waiting. The air was thick with the hum of engines, and the soldiers around him moved with practiced precision. Davis was escorted to the vehicle, where a team of men were already loading up equipment. They barely glanced in his direction as he climbed inside. Jensen was already sitting in the front seat, staring ahead. He didn't speak as the engine roared to life and the convoy began its journey. The other vehicles followed closely behind, a line of military-grade trucks making their way through the night. The sky was dark, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp that flickered past. Davis leaned back in his seat, his thoughts heavy. He wasn't sure what had brought him to this point, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever was hidden in those mountains, it was far more than a simple mystery. It was something dangerous, something that could change everything. The convoy sped through the night, cutting through the empty roads like a force of nature. The further they drove, the more isolated the world around them became. The city lights disappeared, replaced by rolling hills and dense forests. The roads grew narrow, winding, and treacherous. Davis couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. At some point during the drive, Jensen turned to him, his face set in grim determination. "We're not just going after answers," Jensen said. "We're going after power. The kind of power that changes everything. You need to understand this, officer. What we're dealing with isn't something any one person can control. It's something bigger than all of us." Davis looked at Jensen, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. Power. Something bigger. It was all starting to make sense in a way that terrified him. He had been naive to think this was just a simple investigation. The truth was far more complex, and far more dangerous. They drove on for hours, the night stretching out before them. The convoy didn't stop, not even for rest. The tension in the air grew thicker with each passing mile. The soldiers around Davis were silent, their eyes sharp, alert. They were ready for whatever lay ahead. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the convoy reached the base of the mountains. The air was cold, and the trees grew thick and dense, casting shadows across the narrow path ahead. They were getting closer. Davis's heart pounded in his chest as the vehicle began to climb the steep roads. The terrain was rough, the roads barely wide enough for the convoy to pass through. The further they went, the more remote it felt. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving them isolated in the wilderness. Suddenly, the lead vehicle came to a screeching halt. The rest of the convoy stopped behind it. Davis's pulse raced as he glanced out the window. In the distance, a faint glow appeared through the trees, a building, half hidden by the foliage. "We're here," Jensen said, his voice low. "Get ready." Davis's stomach twisted with fear and anticipation. This was it. Whatever lay ahead would change everything. There would be no turning back. As the convoy disembarked, the soldiers moved quickly, their weapons ready. Jensen motioned for Davis to follow him, and they made their way toward the building. The glow from within grew brighter as they neared. And then, as they stepped inside, the truth finally hit Davis like a punch to the gut. The building wasn't just a research facility. It was a vault. A vault holding something so powerful, so dangerous, that the entire world would tremble if it was ever revealed. And as Davis stepped into that dark room, he finally understood the full scope of the conspiracy. The world was about to change forever, and they were the ones who would determine its fate. But in the end, Davis realized something even more terrifying. The true power wasn't in the vault, or in the hidden location, or in the mysterious numbers. The true power was in the people who controlled it all. And they weren't going to let him walk away.